Thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks all for coming out. So just to talk a little bit more about how I kind of came to be at Positive Money. As you said, I did a research degree in carbon capture and storage. I started in 2008. It was quite an exciting place to be there because it was kind of like a technology for bridging the transition between fossil fuels and renewable energy, and there was a competition in the UK, and we were going to have a carbon capture and storage project up and running by 2014, and I kind of imagined myself going to work on it. It was probably going to be in Scotland, but obviously then the financial crisis really kind of sunk in, and that environmental agenda seemed to just be getting shelved by the government, I kind of started thinking more and more about the economic system. And in 2011, I was at a talk by Anne Pettifor, who's a kind of economist and was one of the only ones to predict the financial crisis. And she kind of said two things that kind of struck me. One was, we can afford renewable energy. And the other thing she said was, well, when the Fed kind of bailed out the US banks, Ben Bernanke just typed some numbers into a computer. And that kind of really struck me and made me think, okay, there's some serious misunderstandings going on, or there's something wrong with the financial system seriously. So that kind of led me on a path to look into economics, and it was actually my dad who sent me the link to Positive Money, I was really excited to join as the campaign manager. And just to say a bit more, we're kind of a research and campaigning organisation set up by Ben in 2010. Spent the first few years kind of really researching the monetary system, trying to kind of tell people how money's created without being told that you're mad. And now we're kind of moving into a more campaigning section of our organisation as the debate is kind of expanding. So we ask questions like inequality, why is the gap between rich and poor getting bigger? Housing, why are prices too high for people to afford? And the environment, what's stopping us tackling climate change? We try and link the big issues to how the monetary system works. So for all those problems, there's kind of an issue like money can solve them potentially, but how does the money system actually work? Who creates it? So quite often, when I think of money, you kind of think of it as circulating, this everlasting money between households, businesses, banks, and back round in the economy, only kind of leaving when the banknotes get too old. But actually, there are kind of two types of money. So there is money that circulates in the economy, but there's also a kind of spendable IOU, which is created when someone takes out a loan, and then when they repay, the IOU is ripped up and disappears. And the everlasting money is kind of cash and coins, and that is created by our Bank of England in the UK, and the cash and coins that we use in Scotland are created by the Bank of England and transferred up here. But that actually only takes up 3% of all the money in circulation in the UK, all of the pound sterling. And the rest, the 97%, are those spendable IOUs that get created when a loan's made and then destroyed when the IOU's returned. And that set 97% is created by the main banks we have, and we're quite an unusual country in a way that we have a very, very undiverse banking sector, controlled by kind of 5 big main banks. And so that money that they create is in the form of electronic deposits in bank accounts. So the numbers you see flashing up on the ATM, most of that money is created when banks make a loan, and it's held electronically on banks' balance sheets. So we don't have a kind of money system where money circulates from households to businesses to banks. And we don't have this model that's actually still taught in textbooks. Savers deposit money in banks and banks lend to borrowers. That model doesn't work. Money is created at the point in which somebody goes into a bank and takes out a loan. And I like to think of that money, those spendable IOUs, as an easy way to kind of think of the electronic money, the spendable IOUs, is as the bath water in the bath. And when the loans are made, it's like the water coming in through the taps. And when their loans are repaid, then it's like the water coming out of the plug hole. And obviously, it's quite tricky to get those two in balance. So usually what's happening is either the money's flooding out of the taps, or, as we saw after the financial crisis, actually, banks panic and stop lending. It's like the taps being switched off. But of course, people still have to repay their loans, and so money is still kind of disappearing for the system, and as the water kind of runs out the plug hole. And that's when you go into a recession or even a depression. In the US, when they had the Great Depression in the late 20s, actually the amount of money shrinked by a third, which is quite a huge amount, makes economy running smoothly very difficult. So just a quote, because it's such a good one, by Professor Galbraith, saying the process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. Okay, so how much have they created? Well, in 1970, there was about £30 billion in both cash and coins. By 1980, the green line is cash, and the blue line is the electronic money, the loans that banks have created. And it was about 100 billion. Does anyone want to guess what it was by 1990? Not quite there yet. $500 billion. About 500 billion. Anyone want to guess by 2000? Yeah, it's still about 850 or 900 billion. And then before the financial crisis, that's when we went past $1 trillion. So then it was about 2.2 trillion pounds. The bank issued money, and then you can see the fraction of cash obviously getting smaller and smaller until it's about 3% as it is now. So quite a substantial amount of money in the economy. And obviously, because it's all being issued when people take out a loan, then it all is backed by debt. So the amount of debt in the economy increases at the same amount. So we have a situation where basically we rent our currency from private banks, because we take out loans from the banks, we have to repay them with interest. So that interest is really the rents that we pay the banking sector for having the privilege to create our national currency. And actually that breaks down to quite a significant amount of money. So it's about 100 to 200 billion pounds that we pay them per year in rent, and that breaks down to about 2.4 to 4.8 thousand pounds per person, which is quite a significant amount of money, and obviously one of the reasons they are so profitable as an industry. Okay, so they get to create all of the money, but what happens to that money? Surely they do something useful. Who decides how to use it? Well, it's the same banks that create it, they get to allocate it. And as I said, because we've got a really undiverse banking sector, there's actually just 5 big banks which get to create and allocate most of the money in the economy. And it's not, the bank, the person that you see when you go into your local branch that's really deciding whether to lend to you or not. It's some kind of complicated algorithms, profit maximizing algorithms that say that. So it's quite a concentrated amount of people that decide where it gets allocated. And quite a vast sum of money. So in the 5 years going up to the crisis, 2002-2007, they allocated £2.9 trillion into the UK economy. Okay, so where did it go? Well, it didn't go into particularly useful things for society or us as individuals. 40% went into mortgage lending, which inflated a housing bubble, which I'll talk about a bit more later. 37% went into financial markets. So that's kind of almost 80% going into things that aren't really useful for most normal people. And only 13% went into business lending. What most people think, is the whole job of banks to do is to lend to business. It's actually only about 10% of what they do. And another 10% went into credit cards, high-cost credit, personal loans. So they have a choice, where to put the money, and obviously they're always going to choose where is most profitable. So they don't lend to productive parts of the economy in anywhere near the way people kind of think they do, and it's around 10% of lending is directed towards useful things. And the majority of it is towards what we'd call non-productive, so financial markets and speculation and mortgage lending. And so what happens is you kind of have consequences which aren't necessarily useful. House prices increase quite rapidly. You also have a situation where the banks get to decide where, what they do with your money. And in terms of speculating in markets, food speculation has caused some attention because some campaigning groups such as World Development Movement has been highlighted, they shouldn't be speculating on food prices, which can have really bad consequences for some of the poorest parts of the world. And, you can end up in a situation where, you're depositing your money with Barclays and they're investing or using part of that money to invest in things like the tar sands in Canada, which is obviously undesirable, but actually they have the legal control over the money when you deposit with a bank. And obviously all the time that they're creating this money, it's causing households and businesses to go further into debt. And so this is just a graph to show the kind of, between 1990 and 2008, household savings as a percentage of personal debt going up. So personal debt as a percentage of GDP going up between 1990 and 2008 from about 60 to 100%. And at the same time, savings as a percentage of disposable income falling from about 10% to 0. So you can see that kind of on the whole, we've been getting more and more indebted in this boom. And eventually the debt becomes too much and a financial crisis is kind of precipitated. And this is Adair Turner, who was the chairman of the FSA in 2012, saying, the financial crisis occurred because we failed to constrain the private financial system's creation of private credit and money. So we have this system where if the banks aren't lending, like the financial crisis, then there's no money. And worse than that, money's actually disappearing, as I showed in the bathtub situation earlier. People are still paying down their debts. Banks aren't lending, so the kind of money in circulation is shrinking in the economy. So you get headlines like this, where politicians are desperate to get banks lending again because it's the only way to get new money into the economy. And as I said, the taps turn off and people are still repaying the debt. So the amount of money shrinks. And quite quickly after a financial crisis, you get a lot of people unemployed. So you can just see the year along the bottom, and around 2008 to 9, a jump of 1 million people became unemployed. And obviously, we live in a country where if you go unemployed, you have social security, and so obviously that's when the national debt jumped a lot as well. That's the situation that we're in. So we have a system where if we want more money in the economy, then we have to take on more debt. But obviously we want less debt, and so we have less money. And really, we'd like a system where you can have less debt with more money, but that's not possible. So I could stop there and say that's basically what Positive Money are advocating, that we just want a system where you can have less debt and more money. But I'll talk for a little bit more about some of the kind of negative consequences of this system. So why is the gap between rich and poor getting bigger? So we kind of have this myth that it's fine for lots of people at the top to have lots of money because it trickles down to the rest of us. But in reality, through systems like the monetary system, it's sucked up from all of us to the people with lots of wealth. And that's done through the money system with kind of interest that we pay to the banks. So this kind of just shows income groups split into deciles, into tens, and the poorest 10% of people pay a disproportionately high amount, so 9.4% of their income, all of the red, is paid to banks in interest, whereas the wealthiest 10% have a disproportionately low amount, so only 1.4% of their income is paid to banks in the form of interest payments. So another way is that obviously businesses and households need the money to kind of keep the economy going, and so they all have to pay interest on that in the form of loan when they take out loans to banks. So it transfers money from the real economy to the banking sector. Geographically, as I said, we've got a concentrated banking sector in the City of London, so from everywhere else in the country, money's kind of sucked in to there, again in the form of interest payments. And also what you do with your money. So when we're all taking out lots of debt, wealthy people tend to take out debt to leverage their assets and speculate on things like mortgages and buying more properties. Whereas if you're on a lower income, you tend to buy consumables, which will actually depreciate through time. So that's another factor to kind of increase this inequality that we've already got. So I've talked a bit about housing already, but just to show a graph, because everyone likes graphs. So the purple line is house prices between 1991 and 2010, and that's showing the index relative to that. So you can see they increased by 300% up until the crisis in 2007. And the other three lines are population growth, housing stock, and mortgage lending. So you have to guess which is which. So which is the green line? I think that's next. Population. Yeah, very good. Population growth. Anyone guess the red line?
Housing stock.
Yeah, housing stock. So the myth that, it's a supply and demand issue, we just don't have enough houses, it might be true on a geographical level, but on a national level, we have enough houses for the people. And so one of the big drivers is the blue line, which is obviously mortgage lending, which increased over 500% up to the financial crisis. It's really driving that bubble. It's money being pumped into mortgages through that period of time. But interestingly, it wasn't that owner-occupiership increased. It's not like more people got to own their own houses. Actually, that went down throughout that time. It was mostly mortgages going to people who already owned homes, buying more homes, buy-to-let, getting on the buy-to-let scheme. And all of that money being pumped into mortgages, had one big effect for people who were renting or had one mortgage, the house that they lived in, which was just to pump up house prices. So in 96, the average house price was 51,000. It increased to 78 in 2004, increased to 140,000 in 2004. Did I say what I said? And increased in 2008 to 179,000. So a huge increase over that period of 12 years. Okay, so just moving on to democracy. So you have a situation where, as we saw, the financial crisis made a lot of people unemployed, which increased the national debt because of their social security and welfare. And you have a situation where a debt-based money system, after a financial crisis and nations become heavily indebted, weakens democracy as that kind of dwarfs the discourse, and there's not too many options for politicians to take. But also in terms of the actual money going into the economy. So in the 5 years leading up to the crisis, the government spent 2.1 trillion and commercial banks lent 2.9 trillion. So a significant amount more, which suggests their kind of power to really shape the economy and how what kind of industries we have in the economy and what we don't. And obviously, whilst there's 650 MPs who decide where that 2.1 trillion goes, and most of it's already allocated to various departments, it's a very small amount of people deciding where that 2.1 trillion goes and where it enters the economy, and whether it just gets stuck in mortgages and financial markets before it hits anyone in the kind of real economy doing real work. So, could it be different? Well, we definitely think so, and we're not the only organisation. We want to see a money system where businesses and households and people that do real work in the economy to keep things going don't have to take on more and more debt, go into further debt. We want to see a situation where you don't have to have a money a money system that has to continuously grow, because if it doesn't grow, it will collapse into a recession, and a lot of businesses will, go bankrupt out of no fault of their own. And we want a money system where money gets to the places we need, whether that's, affordable housing or flood defences. That's in Dundee, I think. I'm not sure where it is, but somewhere in Scotland. And energy, we need renewable energy. So we want to see a money system where we can get new money to the places we actually need for a healthy economy. So what does positive money do? Well, as I said, the first few years was really taken up with research. So we did one book with the New Economics Foundation called Where Does Money Come From? And then this was the book that we did on our own. So Andrew Jackson and Ben Dyson wrote it, and it's called Modernising Money. And it's also how the money system works now, but also half of it is how we propose things could be different. I won't, lie. It isn't the most exciting of reads. Quite a few balance sheets in there, but it's quite a thorough, thought-through proposal of how things could be different. That isn't, totally out there. It could be done. Basically, what we propose are that we could have a situation where, instead of going to a bank and depositing it and it being legally theirs and they can do what they like with it, you have a situation where you have two types of accounts. You have a current account, which will sit with a bank, but within that bank, it will sit at the Bank of England. And they won't be able to do anything with it. It will be safe. It will be money that they can't go and speculate anywhere. And so if there's any financial crisis, that money won't have moved and you'll be able to extract it as and when. And then there'll be investment accounts where if you do want to take a little bit of risk but get some interest on your money, you can invest it, but you kind of realign risk and reward. So our proposal also suggests that banks won't be able to create money anymore. Actually, all new money will be sustainable, everlasting money that doesn't get destroyed when loans are repaid. And the way that will work, kind of with our bathtub analogy, it will be like putting the plug in and shifting who is in control of the taps. So it will no longer be the banks that are creating money. They're going back to being kind of intermediaries between savers and borrowers. And the decision of how much and what for gets a split, because if you have both under the same control mechanism, then it's a conflict of interest. And in a similar way to the current Monetary Policy Committee sets interest rates, you could have a money creation committee that looks at how much new money, if any, we need in the economy each month. And the government looks at how to spend it. And so that money would be created free from debt and spent in the public interest. So is this a radical idea? Well, maybe some people think, but it has happened before in the UK, one of the only kind of historical documented places. But in the 1800s or before then, all over the UK, banks could create their own banknotes, and that led to quite an unstable money system where lots of financial crises happened. And the government of the day decided that actually the Bank of England should take on the sole responsibility for issuing banknotes. So they passed a bill, the Peel Act, in 1844. It's never been updated to account for, obviously, the kind of evolution of money. And actually, there's never been a debate in Parliament, really, since then about money creation and who should create a national currency. So I'm in Scotland. I couldn't not mention the fact that you're going to have a referendum on Scottish independence. And, it kind of doesn't really change things. We're advocating for money reform on a UK-wide scale. If Scotland went independent, then we'd hope that people would advocate for money reform on a national scale in Scotland. And we've done a small report just to kind of lay out the five design flaws of the pound sterling and how it could be done differently if it was, if Scotland did go independent and you could set up your own central bank and issue your own national currency. And tomorrow, we're launching a petition, the Positive Money are, to basically say that we want to have a national debate now about money creation. So we're launching that through our subscriber list. We've got about 25,000 people now who are supporting us online, and we're hoping that they're all going to sign it and share it and get a lot more people interested in this debate, because we think it's a really important one. And to kind of follow that up, we are pushing for a backbench debate. So MPs who are on the backbenches can can put forward their own debates. We've got a handful, we're now up to 11 that are committed to kind of going to a backbench debate and talking about this issue of money creation and who should create our nation's currency. And so we'd love for you, if you're interested, to visit your MP, try and get them interested. I think come and talk to Andrew or Richard or Scott about maybe going as a team and to go and see your MP and see if you can get them interested. We're not asking them to have an opinion to say what the right proposal is or to agree with Positive Money, but we're saying, we should have a national debate about who gets to create it, because the same banks that caused the financial crisis it's still the same system. Nothing's changed. We've still got unaffordable housing. We've still got the highest personal and household debt in history, and they're getting to blow up another housing bubble. So we need a national debate. We're trying to get things going across the UK. So we've had about 150 meetups over the last year in 30 different cities. We're getting local groups to kind of meet up more regularly, quite a few meet up monthly. So it'd be great if a local group formed here in Edinburgh. And also we are kind of spreading internationally. So we've now got about up to 20 sister organisations. So all volunteers. They're not as big as, or they haven't grown as many supporters as we've got in the UK, but they're starting. They've got websites, they've got social media accounts, and they're raising the debate in all these countries across Europe and even further afield. So that's quite exciting, especially when smaller countries which don't have such vast bank lobbies can actually get to their politicians quite easily and get a debate going. So we're quite excited about places like Iceland, where there's even interest to do a feasibility study potentially into money reform. So we want to support them, because although we want to grow the campaign in the UK, we are well aware that we have one of the 2 biggest banking lobbies in the world. So if we can see some other countries move first as well, that would be great. So that's about all from me, just to kind of leave it at that. It's not a law of nature that we have to have a debt-based money system. And thanks for coming.
So I have 2 questions. The first question is, you divided the amount of money that banks lend in 4 different categories, and the 2 first were non-productive and the 2 last were productive, right? Did I understand right?
Yeah, so it was the third one was for business loans in the UK, and then.
So the question is, if that's the little of the money they lend is for productive stuff, why, when they shut the tap, why do they not shut just the first part and not the second part? Or put in other words, what's the benefit of not lending to businesses in crisis time? And the second question is, why is it possible to change the currency system in one country without changing it in all the others to make it possible? Because I don't know, if Iceland decides to start changing it, but then how do they do it to, for example, buy foreign currency in that country? Would that depreciate their money to an external values or something?
So, should I answer that one before we go? Okay, so first question on business. It's just really not in the bank's business model anymore to make small loans to businesses, because they're so ginormous. Basically, if you've got so there are kind of 2 things. First, the amount of the loan, and then the kind of backup. So if you lend to a house, the average house price in London is now hitting £500,000. If the person then defaults on their loan, you've still got the house. Obviously, you don't that often make bigger business loans of £500,000. So you make lots of small loans. So there's lots more kind of paperwork to do to make that many loans. But also with their limited liability, if a business goes bust, then there's not much for the if they default on their loan, there's not much for the bank to take. So there might be some assets like some computers or something, but there's not much to back that up. So it's just more risky. And in many different ways, it's more risky. So that's why they're kind of incentivized both in that way and also in the kind of international banking standards way to lend to mortgages. And then with the international one, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, obviously, if, say, a smaller country like Iceland did the money reform thing, there would obviously be a big reaction in the markets, and bankers would panic and say, "Oh, I'm not going to invest in that Icelandic company anymore." But it kind of depends, I guess, how dependent the country is on flows of money coming in and out of their country in terms of the real economy. But there's no practical reason why it couldn't happen, and why the market shocks wouldn't calm down after after a period of time. But also there's the potential that it might be seen as, once they got over the initial shock, they might actually realise it's quite a safe investment then, because it's not going to have booms and busts as easily. So it might even become an attractive country to invest in.
One of the things that appealed to me about positive money was the democratisation, and your idea about the idea about using a committee to decide how much money should be. I'm a wee bit uneasy about that on two grounds. One is that it sort of implies it's a technical matter, but really it's a political one, is it not? And the other thing is, how would they be accountable to the public? Because what's to stop it just being captured by the kind of interest that we've seen capture the finance industry?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a straightforward matter, and I don't say that, we've not necessarily got it right. I think the issue is that you could say a lot of politicians are already a bit captured, so then giving them both the kind of power to create money and allocate it could be a conflict of interest. And because the public are so distrustful of politicians at the moment, part of the way that we've made the reforms are to make them as politically acceptable in the current situation. Not saying that we're necessarily, really bound to these specific reforms, and we've kind of put a bit more democracy in place. So at the moment, the MPC is really undemocratic, and it's just appointed by the governor, and obviously the governor of the Bank of England is just appointed by the Chancellor. And we kind of say that there should be some kind of election where the MPs elect, a bit like they currently elect like the select committees. So at the moment, MPs elect who's on the committees based on who knows more about the environment, or knows more about housing, or knows more about the treasury, like economics. So we kind of say the MCC should be elected economists. But I think it is kind of a technical. You have to have economists on there, because if the stability thing, you don't want to be creating excess amounts of money or too little money that might make you go into inflation or deflation. So you do kind of have to have some people that are able to do the modelling and the kind of complicated stuff, I think.
Okay, point taken, but I trust economists even less than I trust
politicians. Fair enough. Yeah.
I think I have two questions, if that's okay. So my first question, you said we have one of the two banking lobbies, large banking lobbies in the world in our country. I just wondered, what does a banking lobby look like?
So it's just because our banking sector is so big and has so much money, they just have vast amounts of resources to put into like stopping any legislation going through. So like a good example is at the moment, or with the banking reform bill, we're trying to get like transparency. So basically data released that shows what sectors banks are lending to on a postcode scale across the UK. So whether they're lending to businesses or mortgages or whatever. And that's just transparency, and they were, really fought hard against it. And what they have is just resource to pour into paying lawyers and paying advisors how to stop any reform going through. And yeah, so whereas civil society generally don't have any resources, so if they want to kind of push something through, then getting MPs' time, getting legal advice about a bill is just a lot more difficult. So it's that just unequal kind of distribution of resources to go into kind of making laws happen. Yeah.
Is the second one, would that be Wall Street, I'm guessing?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah. So
And
it's just really where...
I mean, Brussels is pretty big as well in terms of like stopping any kind of EU reform on banks getting through as well. So I don't know what the sizes are, but I'm pretty sure London and Wall Street are the biggest ones, kind of.
So my second question, I'm not even sure I know how to ask the question, but I just, you have, in this country, we have the City of London, which is an independent jurisdiction, which is not under Westminster's control, where most of the banks are. I know, sorry, it's a huge question. I don't even necessarily know the question I'm asking. I'm just trying to, how do you manage effectively an independent state where most of the money is being created inside our country and then starting to democratise money inside that?
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
I don't even,
So yeah, the City of London is a corporation in itself, which is really weird. And I don't know enough about it, but I mean, there's kind of two things. There's like political parties, if they weren't, scared, they do still think the banking sector is like our best industry. They are still under that kind of dream. So they're really scared of doing things, basically, anything. I don't feel like yet the City of London Corporation is even scared of them making decisions against the banking sector. But obviously, if they were, that could come up and they could, I don't know what powers they have, but one of the powers is this thing called a remembrancer, and it's a man that or it could be a woman, I guess, that stands behind the Speaker of the House in the House of Commons and can like whisper things to him behind her. It's really weird.
Yeah.
There was a film called UK Gold that was about tax avoidance mostly, but it kind of uncovered this idea, and there's been a few petitions going around about let's get rid of this person that has special powers in the House of Commons. So these things are surfacing, but I think at the moment we're still at the stage where we need politicians to wake up and realise they need to they need to have some political will before the kind of power of what the banks do have is really kind of shown for what it is.
The City of London is so powerful, it's like the Vatican in Rome.
Yeah.
Different thing, but it's very similar. You can't go against it. Otherwise you're excommunicated to deny it.
I mean, I stood as a paper candidate in the recent council elections, and I was not going to get elected, I was just there to be on the sheet. And we all got brochures sent to us from the City of London Corporation, already before you even got no chance of being elected as a councillor in London, but they're kind of already trying to sweeten you or something. It's very scary.
Question at the back.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that the reason that politicians focus so much on economic growth is also a consequence of the way money works. What is your view on that?
So, not necessarily. So I mean, the situation we have is we've got a debt-based money system. So if we stop creating money, then the amount of money shrinks. And so you kind of are either growing or collapsing. So they are desperate to have growth. But then, GDP is only, increasing at 2% a year, which you could look as being quite stable. But then if you look at money being pumped into housing, it's much bigger than that. So there's an argument to say that if all new money went into something that would create new goods and services, which would increase GDP, then we'd kind of have alarm bells ringing a lot earlier than we did, if that makes sense. But I feel like, we can't get away from growth when we've got a debt-based currency, because if you stop creating it, you just collapse in a way.
Right.
Back row.
On your map of housing, businesses and so on, that you showed how the debt loan, created money is allocated.
Yeah.
It didn't really talk very much about the funds which are then gambled on the stock exchanges and on commodities and so on. So I understood that one thing that's changed in the last few decades is this money, you focused a lot on housing. I totally understand that, and there's the leaflet on how the mortgage side of things is very significant. But can you talk a little bit more about the role of these secondary and tertiary things in the financial system, where there's gambling basically?
Yeah. I mean,
and where does that lie? Because I thought that was what a lot of the creative money was being used for.
yeah, I mean, it's like I put it up as almost as big as the amount going into mortgage lending, like 37% into the financial markets. But I mean, they're kind of a black hole to me in a way. They're, you know, trading these weird mathematical algorithms that some poor PhD students have come up with. But it's a black hole. But I think the key is money gets created by banks lending into some kind of less dodgy financial instrument, and then it just goes into a kind of the markets, the stock markets, and gets stuck there, and it, you know, it doesn't trickle down into the real economy as we're told. But it is a horrendously complicated system and completely unproductive. I mean, there's a really good argument to scrap the whole thing, right? Scrap the stock markets, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's not something that we at Positive Money have spent a lot of time looking into, exactly the pathways of money that's created as loans going in and where it ends up and that kind of thing.
And then I suppose I slightly take issue with the image of the house and just saying and asserting that shelter is unproductive, because it's quite an awkward thing. In the human psyche, shelter is a, you know, nearly a human right, and that. But what isn't is the value added, the artificial value added. So it's the bubble, which is unproductive. It's not the actual. So have you ever had comments like that before about how?
But it's not housing. It's not the construction of houses and building buildings is the problem. It's the fact that because the way the money is used with mortgages, too much money goes into mortgages, the price of the houses just goes up and up and up.
Yes.
You don't build more housing. That's the problem.
So it's the asset, it's just inflating it as an asset that's the problem, sure.
And it's not like it's getting more, that's why I talked about that owner-occupier thing, because it's not like it's getting more people to own their houses. It's actually just increasing the people that own the multiple homes. If you look at the statistics from the ONS, it's the owner-occupiership went down in the period up to the boom. It was people buying multiple homes, and obviously they're controlling rent. There's like, you know, rent controls is another area which is pretty outrageous. So yeah, it's mortgages, it's not house building that we're trying to kind of highlight.
The non-productive part just relates to the fact that you're not putting money into new housing, but into existing housing.
Yes, I appreciate that.
It's new, I think it's new money. It's 40% of newly created money, so it's not. So
it's where it starts off.
That's right. Sorry. The next question was you, sir.
I just wanted to refresh you with the what's the debate in the House of Commons? What the oncoming debate was that for?
So it's not been tabled yet, but it's a backbench debate that we're trying to make happen, and it's going to be on money creation, something along the lines of who should create our nation's currency, or should our nation's currency be created in the public interest. And we've got kind of three, kind of Michael Meach from the Labour Party, Steve Baker from the Conservatives, and Caroline Lucas from the Greens, who have kind of agreed to lead it to try and get cross-party support, and we've got 11 so far. So if we can get any more MPs signed up, then it's more likely to get tabled sooner and have a longer time to debate.
Just a quick one. Have you contacted all the MPs about your philosophy, and did you, just generally, did you get any kind of response from?
Not all of them, because we've contacted the ones that have had some kind of contact with what we're doing, either through signing an early day motion on money creation or being on the Treasury Select Committee. I think you know, at first, so in March, the Bank of England came out with a paper about money creation, and they kind of, you know, backed what we were saying, which is that money creation isn't constrained in a way. It is all created by banks when they lend. And that's really helped to kind of move the debate forward. And now we've had the chief economist of the Financial Times say, basically advocating a similar proposal to us. And those two things in a short space of time has meant that actually it's becoming a bit more mainstream. So now we're going back to the politicians and they're actually listening to us a bit more because they can see the debate's not going away, it's just gathering steam, which is really exciting because if we, you know, contacting them a year ago, they just were kind of very dismissive. And so basically we're trying to mobilise supporters to talk to their MP because an MP's first priority is his or her constituents. So it's much better coming from the constituents than coming from us because we're quite small and yeah, exactly.
So Ben Stewart then.
All right, I'm Ben. I come from, I guess, a pretty similar background to yours. I just did a master's in ecological economics here at the University of Edinburgh. And so that's also how I came into this. The topic, I was mostly concerned with growth actually, and solving climate crisis, solving pollution, solving all these things. Although there is a section on the website on the environment, it's not exactly a big part of your promotion material. I can imagine that right now, you know, to gather a lot of interest, you know, focus on the acute crises right now, even though, you know, you could really argue that the environmental crisis is pretty acute as well, with news coming about the Antarctic ice sheet, the western half just being completely lost, basically. Is that it felt to me when I came across Positive Money roughly 2 years ago when I was back in the Netherlands, where I'm from, but a lot of my friends here in the environmental movements, and like I work in an international development consultancy just south of Edinburgh, and they're all doing environmental management, and none of them had heard of this issue, and it's I feel like there's so much we could gain if you could get environmentalists behind this as well.
Definitely, I mean, it's something I'm really passionate about doing. Sorry, had you finished there?
No, I'm finished, yeah.
Just, and I've thought about it a lot, and I guess the main reason is the kind of way Positive Money's always started from is the kind of research-based advocacy stuff. So the kind of how the monetary system works and how we're reformed is based on a lot of research, and basically it's a lot simpler to exactly correlate or have kind of cause and effect relationship between things like the housing bubbles and this monetary system, and the environmental stuff's just much harder, and the growth stuff. So Tim Jackson, who wrote Prosperity Without Growth, it's been really exciting that he read Modernising Money, and he was like, oh, this really helped me fit this piece in, and now he's doing research a bit more on that connection between the monetary system and the environmental stuff. And Andrew Jackson, our main researcher, has gone to do a PhD with him and kind of on this stuff. But, you know, a few of other friends that are also from environmental backgrounds and interested in this have gone. I know someone that went to a PhD and was like, yeah, I'm going to just totally come up with the link between the environment and the monetary system that's really clear. And she was like, switched her topic to housing after and the mortgage bubble after 6 months, because it's just really complicated. So I think, I don't think we've got clear arguments that are succinct that we can kind of put out there without knowing that we could probably be shut down a bit. So it's kind of figuring out how to talk to people without.
Basically, we need better arguments.
Yes. Sounds like a topic to develop in the pub.
Yes.
For our next the next round. Yeah. Stuart, do you have
just one thing, there are other things which you could probably argue go along with reforming money.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether you've looked at things like land value taxation, or if you have, you should get a view on it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think everyone that works at Positive Money is we're all supporters of land value tax and kind of citizens' income. basic income. But we know people that are in the Land Value Tax campaign, but you know, it's already quite complicated to talk about money, so we're not going to go veer off. But we're very supportive on a personal level and a kind of organisational level of land value tax. It's rent-seeking stuff again.
Did you have
Yeah, well, it's getting less clear in my mind, but that's all right. I mean, my question, not what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Have you identified a country that has an economy as close as what your philosophy, let's say?
As close.
Have you identified a country in the world that is pretty close, or the closest of what you wish to promote, or what you're promoting?
Yeah, no, I haven't done enough research into other countries, but I mean, Iceland seems pretty. I mean, it's quite small, so it's only 500,000 people. It's like half of Hackney, or Hackney Borough in London. But they could do it, and I don't see why it wouldn't work. 5 million, we think, would be a good size country. So Denmark, Scotland, New Zealand. New Zealand, because it's big enough to be taken seriously, but it's also, New Zealand and Denmark are our hopes.
But the question was it that is there a
current
system?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no.
Which uses.
Or something the closest would be.
Oh, close.
The close, let's say, at least would be like Iceland or potentially Iceland. In the
but
future.
no, not very close, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
We're all in lots of debt. We don't have
There are historical examples in there.
Yeah.
Scott?
It was just 2 points from what Ben was talking about and how you sort of marry the sort of money thing into the environment. I don't know, you maybe heard of Nate Higgins, he's an environment guy, and he did a really good YouTube presentation. I'll try and forward it to you. It's about an hour and a half. But he talks about if you can create infinite money, fiat currency, if you have 100,000, if you create £100,000, then you're actually asking the ecosystem to match that £100,000. The ecosystem isn't finite. So I guess that was his way of looking at it. The other thing I was going to say is, obviously the flip side of a recession is that all your green policies go out the window.
Yeah.
So they're the first things that get kicked into touch as soon as you have a recession. Now, people want a house, there's more important things than the environment, and that's what you came for, wasn't it, Fran?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually that's the one thing that we advocate that we're quite sure on, is that the one reason environmentalists shouldn't want the system is because it creates boom and busts, and recessions make governments kick out environmental safeguards.
Another issue with money and the environment, I guess, is that a mathematician has calculated that because there is interest on money, it's actually most efficient to fish all the whale out of the sea to extinction as quickly as possible, then have your money in the bank and let it grow with interest, rather than fish the whales sustainably. In the end, if you do a cost benefit analysis, it will be better to just fish the whales to extinction, and that's because of interest on the money. So that's something that would not be addressed in this system, or maybe to some extent. But
part of that is the whole, modern economics doesn't factor in externalities, does it? So it's the cost of actually depleting your system that you profit from to extinction isn't actually a good idea if you kind of factor that into your economics. But
Right, I think we'll take just a couple of last questions. There are lots of last questions. Okay, people who haven't spoken before, then please. So just behind you, Sarah, and then you, and at the back row, I think. Okay, 3 last ones. Go for it.
Yeah, okay. So touching on that point the gentleman made, isn't that the profit aspect of it? Doesn't this idea threaten the basis of the profit motive itself? Because that's the thing that drives increasing financialization and everything else. Right, it's like the justification for doing all of this is the pursuit of profit. So I work in the third sector, so I'm clean. But it's that desire for profit that justifies all of this. Not our current system, I mean, not what you're proposing. So to start chipping away at that means a fundamental rethink of our entire value system, which is quite frightening for a lot of people, isn't it? Because if you're not doing it in pursuit of profit, then where's your motive?
Yeah, just to make a quick comment on that, yeah, I definitely agree. But I think just kind of on an everyday perspective, it's like you don't really begrudge the person that's like working really hard, making stocks to earn a profit, but you do begrudge people that are just kind of rent-seeking profit, which is the kind of finance sector.
Profit is when you make money without working, right? When you give money to some people and they work for you, they do something, you sell it for a higher price, and then you get the money. That's profit.
We could define profit online.
Okay, but I'm not sure that the positive money proposal changes that, makes such a fundamental change.
No, but it's the kind of a post-growth kind of mindset, isn't it, of just kind of, the profit motive is what compels us to do more in most business circles. So if you're...
Well, there's the profit is the good side, and there's the avoidance of debt.
Yeah.
So you have a pool, but there's also debt coming up behind you.
But if debt is the profit centre itself, if the issuance of debt is the profit centre, then...
This is the City of London issue. So did you have
a question that has disturbed me for a long time? It's too big a question to expect an answer here, and I don't expect, but I'd like to leave it. Regarding the difference between America and the UK, America is now 17 trillion in debt, and the only way they know to get back on the rails allegedly is to increase and increase and increase. And then we have the UK. The only way we can get back on the rails, says our Bank of England and our Chancellor, cut. Now the question, as I say, just for later, is either system right? Is one of them right? Or are they both wrong to get us back on the rails as human beings? But don't answer now, because it'll be here all night.
I fundamentally disagree there. I think both the American and the UK approach to debt, government debt, is exactly the same. The government debt in the UK will be 1.4 trillion pounds by 2015. Although there's a veneer of austerity in Britain, this present government has doubled the national debt. And it's exactly the same approach really as the Americans. And that's the futility of the system.
Yeah, but the things that are being cut here are the essential things in jobs and everything else.
That's a political stance. That's a political stance.
And political doesn't come into it.
Provided there's no positive money system, I think the Americans have a better idea. Austerity is really hurtful, and that's what actually caused the Great Depression.
I mean, the key thing is if you cut jobs, then they go on Social Security and take out benefits, so then you increase your deficit anyway. So it's a bit of a non-productive thing to do.
Was there a question in the background? I think this might be the last one.
Yeah.
Okay, it was more of a comment. I'd just be interested to respond to it. And I'm not sort of 100% sure of this. You're talking about potential gains from allying your cause to environmentalists, but I would actually put that the other way and say, well, if you look at people in the country, for example, when you poll, a majority of people will either say that they don't believe in man-made climate change or they don't know. And so might you actually do better by emphasising the other benefits? I mean, I like the fact that this has environmental benefits, and I think that's great. And you might get a lot of really keen activists by sort of marrying it to an environmental cause, but actually, if you have all the people who don't believe in climate change and all the people who hate windmills on board as well, for other perfectly good reasons to do with how it's going to make their life better, then I don't know, that might help. It's just a thought. I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I think, everyone's different, and we're not going to not try and get on board different types of people. I think at the moment we tend to appeal to people who think more holistically about society and big issues, and they are more likely to kind of get active, and so they are, quite often, tuned into the climate change very vital debate. So, but there's, when I talk to different people, friends or family, I don't try and talk about different things. Like house prices is obviously the main one to people, especially people living in London, young people who have no hope of owning a house. But often they aren't necessarily the people that are kind of ready to that kind of take it on fully and then want to act on it, because actually they haven't been thinking, oh God, the economy's really broken, and it's like looking at the bigger picture. And I think if you've been looking at the bigger picture for a while, then it really helps. Then you're more likely to get motivated when you hear about this. So that's
This
it.
is so fundamental, and this is going to be hard enough.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
This is complicated enough, it's going to be hard enough to change. Let's just do this. And on that note, I think I'd like to join me in thanking Fran again for coming on.